And now it's time for a story, a short story about science. We all know that calcium is important for our teeth and our bones, right? And oxygen is important for us to breathe and have life, yeah? But did we ever learn in school where those elements, calcium and oxygen, came from? What about carbon, the building block of carbon dioxide, which plants need for survival? Or iron, the most important element in our very own blood? To discover the origins of these building blocks of life on Earth, we must look up at the night sky and study the stars that twinkle brightly over our heads. Stars? What do the stars have to do with teeth and bones? Well, let's go back in time. Far, far back, long before humans existed, long before even Earth came into being, to the beginning of time. The very first stars were made of very light hydrogen gas, which swirled around and around and around, getting hotter and hotter and hotter under the pressure of gravity, until the heat at the center of that swirling vortex fused those hydrogen atoms together, creating atoms of elements that we call carbon, iron, and oxygen. But these new elements were heavier than that hydrogen gas, so they couldn't go swirling round and round, flying around the outside of the star. They stayed right there in the center of the star, which continued to burn hotter and hotter and hotter, until finally the heat at the center of that star became so fiery hot that it couldn't remain contained anymore. Eventually, the power of that heat became stronger than the force of gravity that was holding the star together, and boom! The star exploded. It blew up, and this enormous explosion radiated all of those heavy elements from the center of the star out into the universe. Now, carbon and iron and oxygen and even calcium atoms and particles were floating around the universe. Little by little, they began to be drawn into other swirling vortexes, eventually becoming the core of new stars, some planets, and those became galaxies. Once our planet Earth was created, those same particles began to organize themselves even further. They created rocks, water, and eventually life. Over millions and millions and millions of years, those same particles kept on reorganizing into more and more complex life forms, becoming plants, bugs, birds, and yes, eventually becoming humans. So when we look down at our bodies, we can't see these particles because they are so tiny. But our skin, our bones, our teeth, and every other building block of our bodies are actually made up of these tiny particles which began as stardust. The atoms and particles that create this body that I call I, or you, originated billions of years ago when ancient stars exploded and radiated these particles out into space. And now this stardust has organized in a most miraculous and complex life form that we call human life. Now we humans are able to gaze up into the night sky and gaze upon the stars from whence we came. We are star stuff contemplating the stars, in the words of Carl Sagan. And so when we sing, "Twinkle, twinkle, little star," we're actually singing about our ancient ancestors. Those stars are not separate from us, they are us, and we are them. Some call it evolution, and others call it God. What is this mysterious force? Whatever we call it, we realize that we are all yearning for a great story that explains the big questions. Who are we? Why are we here? And what is this all about? Though such questions elicit deep awe and a sense of mystery, the scientific precision of modern technology has been uncovering clues that provide the framework for a cosmology that can offer a sense of purpose and meaning to our lives. For example, thanks to the Hubble telescope, we now know that there are over 100 billion galaxies in the universe, billions upon billions of stars, And yet, as we learned in the Time for All Ages story earlier, we are made of stardust. Those stars, those distant galaxies, are not different from us. They are just different forms of the same matter that has been swirling around the universe since time began. Those subatomic particles and atoms have sometimes been part of a star in a swirling galaxy far, far away, and sometimes those same atoms have come together in a temporary pattern that makes up a physical form that I call me. Now, as I occupy this physical form that I call a body, I can use the functions that were created by this miraculous organization of matter, my senses, like my vision, to look back upon the stars in the night sky. In the words of Carl Sagan, I'm star stuff, contemplating the stars. So what does that mean? Could this knowledge possibly have any relevance for us in our daily lives? I think so. To explain, I'd like you to join me on a contemplative journey through time, a timeline I first heard from spiritual teacher Craig Hamilton in his Academy for Evolutionaries. Let's go back in time to that moment of the Big Bang, that instant in which something exploded out of nothing. 13.7 billion years ago, all of the energy and matter in the universe was condensed into a single point, smaller than the head of a pin. From this point of singularity, of infinite potential, a cosmic firestorm erupted, radiating energy in a burning, chaotic, intense wildness that burned for 1 million years. From this chaos, gravitational forces began to pull those subatomic particles together to create the simplest atoms, those that we now call hydrogen and helium. As those atoms aggregated into primordial stars, they burned and burned with increasing intensity until they exploded as supernovas, which scattered the heavier elements like carbon and oxygen into the universe. Over the course of the next 10 billion years, those elements came together and formed stars, galaxies, and planets, including what we now call our home, Earth. Once Earth had formed, it took about another billion years before the earliest life forms came into being. Bacteria, blue-green algae, and other microorganisms dominated the planet for about 1 billion years. Those early forms of life absorbed carbon dioxide and drew their energy from that. In the process, they released oxygen as a byproduct. Now, as the population of those microorganisms increased, greater quantities of oxygen began to fill the atmosphere. But oxygen at that time was not the breath of life as we know it today. In an anaerobic world like it was then, oxygen would have been viewed as a toxin. Had there been an anaerobic CNN channel, it would have been broadcasting tragic stories from the front as one by one the anaerobic organisms began to die off in the presence of increasing oxygen. As the situation reached a point of crisis, the organisms faced imminent extinction, something extraordinary happened. In a swift evolutionary leap, some of the microorganisms developed the capacity to process oxygen efficiently. What had been a likely catastrophe was actually the catalyst for a new way of being in the world, the birth of aerobic life, the ability to use oxygen. Now, once this capacity had been developed, the evolution of life forms accelerated. From bacteria emerged worms and invertebrates, vertebrates, plants, insects, amphibians, trees, and reptiles. The Earth seemed to explode into a diversity of life forms in the millions of years that followed. The dinosaur age offers us another opportunity for contemplation. No one knows for sure what brought an end to the dinosaur age, but one theory is that of a 10-mile wide asteroid hitting the Earth in a giant cataclysm. And according to such a theory, the dinosaurs, which had dominated life on land till this point, were completely wiped out, either by the impact or the earthquakes that followed, or the acid rain or the extreme temperatures. Yet, hiding down below the surface in subterranean burrows were these little mammals, relatively new on the evolutionary stage. And and they survived this colossal impact. Now that the dinosaurs were gone, these mammals were free to roam the land without the threat of predators. Over the next millions of years, those early mammals flourished and diversified, eventually evolving into all of the amazing mammals that we know today, including us humans. Now, if we pause here for a moment, we can sum up the evolutionary process thus far in one short summary, as eloquently stated by cosmologist Brian Swimme. You take hydrogen gas, you leave it alone, and it turns into rosebuds, giraffes, and humans. Turning back to our journey, we discover that over time, human culture and creativity emerged. Our awareness of the cycles of birth and death, the earliest artwork on cave walls, this evolutionary process increased in speed, practically flying through the ages of hunter-gatherers to farmers to industry, and now the information age. From the family unit to the tribe, to the city, to the state, to the nation, and now what we're seeing as the beginnings of a global village. From papyrus to the printing press, to the telephone, and now the internet. The horse and buggy to the automobile to the space station. Now, from this broader perspective, we could see that evolution has not really been random, meaningless chance, but rather there is a directionality to it. It has moved toward greater cooperation, interdependence, and complexity. Philosopher Irvin Laszlo writes that the probability of our life-supporting universe coming together by random selection is almost nil. In the nearly 14 billion years of evolution, the time that was available for evolution would not have been sufficient to generate the complex web of life on this planet merely by trial and error. Mathematical physicist Sir Fred Hoyle has calculated the possibilities and came to the conclusion that they are about the same as the probability that a hurricane blowing through a scrapyard assembles a working airplane. So, as we review the history of the cosmos with an eye for directionality towards complexity and cooperation, we see that those initial subatomic particles came together to form the first atoms. The first molecules came together to form cells. Cells joined together to create multicellular organisms. And now, multicellular organisms like us, humans, have come together to form clans, tribes, societies, continuing to move towards ever-widening circles of cooperation, unity, and complexity. Just like cells within a larger superorganism we might call Earth. Just like the 70 trillion cells within our own bodies work together harmoniously to make up this form and function that we call the human body, we are awakening to the realization that we must broaden our perspective beyond our individual selves and learn to cooperate for the health of the larger organism. The long lens of cosmic history reveals that we are not separate from the universe or the evolutionary process, but we're in the midst of it. We are it. These evolutionary dynamics which have created and continue to create the cosmos are now conscious and awake as you and me and the rest of the human species. Through each one of us, this great cosmic force is able to gaze upon itself and appreciate every unique and beautiful manifestation of stardust in all of its various forms. This greater consciousness is now through us able to experience its own force as an expression of love, kindness, and compassion. In our desire to connect with other people, to be kind, to relieve the suffering on this planet, to care for others, to love our families near and far, we are embodying that great cosmic force that is the self-organizing principle of the universe. This force, whether we call it evolution, whether we call it God or love or any other name, is that which has given a directionality to the evolutionary process, drawing together atoms to form stars and cells together to form human life, creating 13.7 billion years of patterns that defy the statistical odds that we exist as a result of random chance. When we experience love, kindness, compassion, gratitude, joy, appreciation, and laughter, we are experiencing the power and delight of this evolutionary force as it exists in human form. Now, it is the realm of quantum physics that allows us to make the connection between human emotions such as compassion or appreciation and the evolutionary process. The old school model of evolution depicted a genetic model based upon mutations or alterations in DNA. This is a mechanistic model that has its place in our studies, no doubt. But that model also exists within a larger framework, one in which everything is known to be energy. All biological processes are influenced by the energetic matrix called the field, or the zero-point field. Each one of us is a drop in this vast ocean of energy. Yet we are like fish who have no concept of what water is. We live in this illusion of separateness, unaware that we are inextricably connected to everything and everyone else. Every one of our thoughts, intentions, emotions, and actions is a wave of energy that ripples through this entire field, influencing the whole matrix, whether or not we're aware of it. And so by changing our thoughts, we really do change the world. Everything is energy, and as we raise our own level of consciousness, we raise the vibrational frequency of the whole field, the field that drives the mechanisms of the evolutionary process. So then what? What does that mean? What do we do with that awareness? Well, the scientific basis of the evolutionary perspective gives us a foundation for trust. We can trust the evolutionary process. We can trust the big picture. We can trust that there is a directionality and meaning to the events of our lives on our planet. For instance, as we are flooded with images of suffering and disaster around the globe almost every day, it's easy to lose hope or become cynical about what seems to be overwhelmingly bleak news. Devastating earthquakes, tsunamis, bitterly cold temperatures, the oil spill in the Gulf of Mexico, tragic shootings, war, poverty, famine, global warming. There's no end to the stream of bad news. But what if we can dig a little bit more deeply and investigate the bigger picture? For example, in recent years, we've had Hurricane Katrina, we've had an earthquake in Haiti, many other disasters that have brought attention to the depth of suffering and poverty that so many people experience on a daily basis. But in response to those catastrophes, have you felt the upsurge of compassion in this country and around the world? People responded to these crises from their hearts. A powerful wave of compassion and connectivity filled all of us as we saw through modern media technology the suffering of our fellow humans. Collectively, we came up with solutions to alleviate suffering, with innovative relief efforts, with extraordinary and unique ways to help. And what if that was the whole point from an evolutionary perspective? To elicit the best parts of ourselves and to come together as one, a common humanity. These are just a couple of examples, of course, but we can look at all global and personal challenges through this lens and seek a new perspective rather than falling into the mainstream doomsday mindset that is perpetuated by the modern media machine. What if events that we label as catastrophe are actually opportunities? Can we step back from our pain and sorrow to consider what is wanting to emerge here? Is this an opportunity to connect with our fellow humans, for us to look beyond ourselves and to see that we're all in this together? What if the whole purpose of problems is to raise our awareness of the whole organism of which we are a part until we finally get it? What if we cultivate our ability to see opportunity rather than tragedy, allow crises to be portals into the deepest wellspring of creativity, love, compassion, and pursuit of solutions to these problems? And what if this is the whole point of being alive? To bring forth the good, the true, and the beautiful that is within each and every person. What if we viewed all of life's challenges from this evolutionary perspective? As we review the history of the cosmos, we learn that all evolutionary leaps have been preceded by chaos, conflict, confusion. When the only life on Earth was anaerobic, the increase of oxygen in the atmosphere would certainly have been viewed as catastrophic. But innovation defied extinction. Rather than die off, those existing life forms created a new solution, a new way of being in which the old problem wasn't a problem anymore. I propose that we are in the midst of a similar evolutionary leap. What if global warming, the energy crises, war, poverty, riots, shooting, suffering, are the equivalent of the introduction of oxygen into an anaerobic system? And we are like the microbes, being urgently called upon to evolve or die. If we can take inspiration from those anaerobic microbes who collectively evolved through the oxygen crisis and use them as a foundation for trusting the evolutionary process, we can reach deep into ourselves and find that impulse which is calling us in the direction of greater cooperation with others, toward new creative solutions, toward a new way of being in the world. As the saying goes, instead of cursing the darkness, we must light a candle. And so it is up to us to cultivate a new way of looking at the world. Faced with catastrophe and conflict, we discover that we have a choice. We can choose to evolve rather than fight each other and kill our planet. We can make conscious choices which will give birth to a new, more evolved version of humanity, perhaps even a new species. We have the lens of hindsight to see that the human species has already evolved from Homo erectus to Homo habilis and now to Homo sapiens sapien, the one who knows that it knows. But from our evolutionary perspective, it seems almost silly and arrogant to think that we would be the end point. Why would we be the final state of the unending process of evolution? It would only make sense that a new species is emerging. It's quite possible that we are on the leading edge of this evolutionary leap if we choose to evolve rather than to continue the old patterns, which will almost certainly lead to extinction. Several scholars subscribe to this theory of a new species and have suggested names for the new us. Homo spiritus is the name given by David Hawkins, MD, to beings who are awake and vibrating at a high level according to a consciousness scale that he has developed. Alberto Villoldo, an anthropologist and a shaman, has labeled it Homo luminous to indicate that we are becoming beings whose energy fields are luminous. And Barbara Hand Clow, a Cherokee elder and writer, calls the new human Homo pacem to indicate we are becoming a species focused on peace. Let's pretend we are anthropologists. 500 years or 5,000 years from now, we're looking back upon the evolution of Homo sapiens sapien into a new species. From that vantage point, we can see the power and importance of every action we take right now that arises out of love rather than fear, from our heart rather than from our mind. As we seek to unite rather than divide in the face of challenges, and we walk the walk, not just talk the talk, of peace, compassion, and loving kindness, we are on the leading edge of evolution, the dawn of a new era in the history of mankind. As we make conscious choices to love rather than fear, to trust rather than doubt, to extend a hand rather than hide behind protective walls, we contribute to a shift in global consciousness and the evolution of humanity. We are now at a point in human history where our choices make more difference than ever. Our current path is not sustainable, either for us as a species or for our beloved Mother Earth. We humans have the power of choice in all of our deeds and thoughts. We can continue to perpetuate the cycle of blame, judgment, greed, conflict, and push ourselves one step closer to extinction, or we can shine the light of love into the dark shadows of ourselves and others and consciously evolve into a loving species of cooperation, collaboration, and harmony with our precious planet. To do this, we must practice seeing through new eyes, eyes that see the best in others and within ourselves, rather than our faults. We must expand our perspective from that of self-interest to the survival and development of the larger community. The success of the whole depends upon each one of us. It is time for each one of us to take personal responsibility and evolve our own inner landscape so that we may take conscious action in the external world. Not only loving our neighbor, but respectfully listening to our neighbor's ideas so that we may together collaborate on the creation of innovative solutions in our communities, from education and healthcare and government to technology, business, and energy. We are consciously co-creating a new world right now. The evolutionary perspectives gives new meaning and urgency to the words of Gandhi when he said, "We must be the change we want to see in the world." Now is the time. This is quite possibly the most exciting or the most urgent period of human history. What we do today really does matter for us and for the future of humanity. This impulse to evolve has been drawing particles together in the universe for billions of years, and that same force is now pulling each one of us together. Knowing this, we can no longer pretend to be passive victims of circumstance in a randomly evolving and meaningless universe. No longer must we dwell in fear or doubt as we consider the challenges of our times. We can be the beacons of hope, shining light into a world that may otherwise feel overwhelmingly dark and desperate. Once we've become aware of this evolutionary impulse within, we climb out of the back seat and into the driver's seat, where we now live our lives with full awareness as conscious participants in the evolutionary process. Evolution didn't end with us, it begins with us. We are the ones we've been waiting for, and it is up to us to create humanity's new story.